Hi everyone, this is Klaus from Plant-Based News. Today we're exploring the incredibly moving documentary Gimme Medicine. Our guest is the film's director, Lauren Bash.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Meet my dad.
My name's Neil.
If you told this meat and potatoes guy from the Midwest that he would switch to a plant-based diet, he'd probably laugh in your face. But he did.
I'm never going to eat another pig again. Pork chop, lamb chop, any chop, no chops.
Because after eating the standard American diet for his entire life, Dad had been prescribed medication for high blood pressure and high cholesterol.
I want to get rid of all these, and it's a drag taking them because
Yeah, nobody wants to be on meds like this.
So I helped him grocery shop, cook, and enjoy plant-based meals to see if they could naturally lower his blood pressure. And they did.
Dad, that's really good.
this shit works.
We documented the whole thing and I shared it online, and you all gave him so much love.
I'm a TikTok rock star.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as much as I want to say that this was easy and lovely for Dad, it can be really hard when the cards are stacked against you.
When patients come in and say, what can I do? They say, here's a pill, here's the procedure. And so patients are really not supported.
I've heard that love is life's best medicine, and I think my dad always knew that. So to honor his story and how proud we are of him, I made this short film called Gimme My Medicine. It's now available on Waterbear, and I can't wait for all of you to watch it.
Boom, baby.
Perfect.
So Lauren, it would be good to get your initial reaction to the reception of the documentary.
Yeah, so prior to the premiere event, the premiere event was beautiful. We had about 400 people in Los Angeles as part of the Hollywood Climate Summit and LA Climate Week. Prior to that night, only about 5 people had watched the film. And so it was extremely vulnerable to share it with everyone. And if you watch the film, you'll see that my dad is just like a total ham bone and is making all sorts of jokes. And so I was worried. I'm like, well, I'm his daughter, so of course I'm going to think it's funny, but I hope other people find it funny too. And so it was really, really special to hear so many people laughing when he would make jokes or just be himself. And so that was probably the coolest part, to get to share my dad with the world. And he made me laugh and he made me feel so special. And he was just, such a funny guy. So that was probably the coolest part, is getting people who had never met my dad to get to experience his spirit. And then secondarily, something that I wasn't expecting at all is, I think when you kind of break the seal and you let people know that you've lost a parent, other people who have lost a loved one feel safe to share their story with you, if that makes sense. And so at the premiere event, and then probably every day since the film came out, people have been writing to me and saying, I lost my mom due to heart disease when I was 13 years old. And I felt really seen and safe watching your film too. And I felt an element of relatability. And that wasn't something I was necessarily prepared for or expecting. And I think that's something really beautiful that's coming out of this too, is the shared experience of grief, and how, when we experience something like this, we get to share it with others. And the coolest part is hearing people with parents or loved ones who have similar diagnoses as my dad and saying, I watched this film with my dad. We're getting him on a plant-based diet. We just signed up for a marathon together in the fall. And I understand my role as his daughter to champion him to have the best days of his life,
Absolutely. Lauren, just to jump in there on your point about that kind of shared relatability, just anecdotally, my dad was diagnosed with something at the start of this year, very similar. And I started watching your film and had to stop it at the point where it started talking about some of the things that he'd been eating and smoking and areas like that. And I was like, oh, goodness. And it's encouraged. I sent it to my brothers to be like, we really need to start thinking about how we can pivot his lifestyle. And it was exactly that, right? You watch something and it moves you to thinking we need to do something differently. So I really relate to that.
My first video has 800,000 views. I'm a TikTok rock star.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the film, I filmed Veganuary with my dad, and I shared all of this content on TikTok and Instagram. And so naturally, when we were filming the content for short form, it was vertical. And after he passed, I was just watching the footage so I could hear his voice again and hear his laugh again and see him again. And perhaps it was his spirit or something, felt like I was given the idea of, you have so much more footage than you shared in these 8, 45-second videos. You have hours and hours of footage with him. Why don't you turn it into something longer? And so in everything new I created, I was like, well, why would I change the orientation to landscape or 16:9 because that's traditional film when all of the archive footage is vertical, you know? So I was and I'm a short form content creator. Like all of my work, I shoot on this tiny little Sony ZV-1, which is like a vlogging camera. And I feel like exactly what Poppy said too. I think there's been such binary thinking that filmmaking is like cinematic and long form and it breathes and it's landscape and resistance to social media. But I think because now, you know, we've had short form video for a while now, there's been this evolution that we can still tell meaningful stories in portrait orientation, you know?
An iPad, so you can FaceTime.
After every ER visit or surgery, we were right there, helping him get back on his feet. Dad was on his own by then, retired, living off Social Security. We did our best to nudge him towards healthier habits, eating right, getting some exercise, maybe even joining a community group. Just something to help him take better care of himself. And as far as dad being I mean, it didn't take much. I think my dad loved being in front of the camera. That's why the very first clip of the film, I say, Dad, you're gonna look here into the lens, right? Because a vlogging camera has a monitor where you can see yourself. And he loved looking at himself. I'm like, Dad, stop looking at the monitor, look in the lens. And he just liked looking at himself. And I think anybody who's experiencing loneliness or is getting older like loves the feeling of being acknowledged or feeling seen. And so that's why when his first video got 800,000 views, which you could tell he loved the attention of that first viral video, I think that almost gave him more skin in the game too of, oh, I have an audience now, I owe it to them.
I don't know how this is going to come across, but you came across in documentaries The Perfect Daughter. What did your siblings think about the production?
We were all, I mean, my dad loved being a girl dad. He was like a bona fide girl dad, and we were all really, really close with him. And so I think if either of my sisters had done that project with him, they would have come across the same on screen too. Like we were all really, really close. And I'm really, really grateful for the like love and communication and honesty and silliness that we have in our family. We're really close with both our parents. And I kind of get into it, although it was only a couple lines in the voiceover, but my parents had been split up for 20 years and they remained dear friends. And I think that was part of it too, is that there was still a lot of respect while they weren't necessarily romantically in love. There was a lot of respect and still a sense of a family unit, even though our parents were split up.
I don't look at anything. I just look at the picture. It doesn't look good. Okay. Do I have to waste all this?
Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it.
Because that's like $15 right there.
Okay, don't worry about it.
All right.
Got it.
Poppy, Waterbury is described as a place for imperfect activists. What do you mean by that? And I think I can certainly say what I read into that is when it comes to anything to do with plant-based or vegan, sometimes there's this tendency to project perfection onto people. But what kind of environment are you hoping to foster with Waterbury, and what other documentaries have you got in the pipeline?
So I'll be really honest. I am what I would call an imperfect activist, right? And I can proudly say that. I try really hard. I don't attend every protest. I can't sign every petition. And I'm not out there kind of day in and day out being this like perfect, flawless person. But I think that's okay. And what we want to foster at Waterbury is this idea of imperfection is allowed. Activism doesn't need to be a competition, right? I think for the last few years, activist is quite a divisive word. And there's this notion that to be a real, and I use inverted kind of commas, a real activist, you've got to give up your entire life to the cause. You've got to be this kind of walking encyclopedia of intersectionality and be immune almost to the exhaustion that comes with fighting for change. And I don't think that anyone has that kind of energy. Everyone needs to be on their own journey. And at Waterbury, we're here for that, right? We recognize that you might be trying really hard over here to be focused on your plant-based diet, but you might be falling behind on recycling, or you might have to take a flight because you've got to get over to the Hollywood Climate Summit because it's really important that you showcase your film there to reach the right audience, right? it's impossible, I think, in this day and age to be perfect. So what we're trying to foster at Waterbury is this community of, as you say, Klaus, it's imperfect activists, people who are on their journey. They might be at the start of their journey, they might be in the middle of their journey, they might be bona fide kind of perfect activists, but we're a space that enables you to be any kind of activist. And that really goes through into the content and the films and the stories that we showcase, right? So not only am I a self-confessed imperfect activist, I also sometimes really like reality television. Hands up, on a Friday night, I have a glass of wine and I watch Love is Blind. I'm really sorry. But there are loads of people out there who do that, right? So how can we start catering to the people who really love a documentary, really love following their creators on TikTok, but also really love reality television? How can we foster an environment that is safe for all of those different kinds of people and has stories that engages those different kinds of people? So to that end, we've got, as I mentioned, long read articles, we've got shorter form films, we've got an amazing series coming up. It's one of my favorites so far about the brief was, how do you mainstream the idea of circularity? And circularity, if I say that to my friends over a glass of wine on a Friday evening, it's a dead word. It's like a dead zone. People don't understand what it means. So how do we embed the idea of circularity into mainstream culture? You've got to hijack culture, right? So you've got to create something that people recognize. So we are in the middle of producing a series on, it's a talent-led cooking show, but it's using food waste, right? So that's a recognizable format. People love cooking shows, but how do you kind of Trojan horse the impact? You use food waste in this recognizable format. So that's one of my favorites that is coming up. But we've also got lots of creator partnerships coming up, and we've got some really cool shorter films coming up that I can't talk about yet. But there's a real smorgasbord of different types of content to engage the different imperfect activists.
And in Gimme Medicine, your dad Neil said, "I've been carnivore for 67 years. If I can do it, anyone can."
I've been a carnivore for 67 years. So if I can do it, anybody can do it, because, that's just facts.
Lauren, would love you to unpack that for the viewer. 67 years. What was that transformation like?
A standard American diet, I'm sure it's similar in the UK too, but it is like meat and potatoes, especially if you go back to when my dad was born in the 50s. He talks about it. He talks about eating meatloaf and hot dogs and hamburger helper and pork chops and things like that. And we get into the film talking to doctors too. Like if you drive down the street and you just pay attention to what the billboards say, or if you walk in the grocery store and you see what is advertised or on sale or readily available, it's going to be like animal-based products. And so that's just what we're told. Like that's what we're told. And I know that's what my dad was told for a really long time, especially growing up in middle America. And so when he moved to California, and it's funny because my mom, I don't know, my mom's not plant-based by any means, but she has an urban farm and she grows a lot of her own food and she's deeply connected to food. And so naturally is very connected to vegetables and fruits. And she has 2 plant-based daughters, so is naturally preparing a lot of plant-based foods. And so I think my dad had exposure to it, but didn't think it was for him. I think you have so much, especially being a man in the US. I think there's almost like masculinity in carnivore diets too. And to break that mindset, or almost like those neurological pathways, takes a lot of influence. And for my dad, it was him. It was the Dr. Alona says it so perfectly in the film. She says, people change when they hurt enough that they have to, they learn enough that they want to, and they receive enough that they are able to. And I feel like my dad, having been having heart attacks and having heart disease and been on all this medication, he had the hurt and the want, but perhaps never received enough support. He definitely wasn't getting it in his doctor's offices. But the turning point for him was when he watched his blood pressure go down. And he says, I get it now. This isn't something that my daughters are trying to evangelize me for anymore. That works for them as these like young granola girls, but something I'm seeing that can work for myself. And that was actually part of the reason I felt so passionate about making the film, is because there are so many amazing vegan films. But I always thought, and the one that I think gets closest is What the Health, because they show case studies. They show patients who are able to wean off their medicine by changing diet and implementing exercise and through lifestyle. But they don't really get into it as like who these people are as family members or community members, but really just them as patients. And I thought, wow, this is such an opportunity to tell dad's story because there are so many other, 60 something year old American men who could really learn from this. And so that's why he kept saying it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. And I think it takes all of that pressure and mindset and belief that we have been indoctrinated for so long as Americans. But when you experience it for yourself, you say, okay, there is evidence here that this works.
And what did you say earlier? I love the quote you said, and I think it was in the film. People change when they need to change. They learn uh, enough that they want to and receive something. Say that again.
Dr. Alona said it. She said, people change when they hurt enough that they have to, they learn enough that they want to, and they receive enough that they are able to. So, so there has to be all three. Like it's kind of like cause, effect, and support, I guess.
Poppy, I feel like I missed what you said at the beginning about your family's adversity. Maybe it'll be interesting to go over that because it's so true, Lauren. What you're saying, it's such a good documentary at making the patient actually a person. It's a more relatable, in-depth look at actually, what the health, and you've got these documentaries, you don't actually know what their families are going through in that in-depth kind of way. But what was it you said at the beginning, Poppy, and how does that quote that we've just looked at relate to maybe your situation?
It couldn't relate more. In fact, my dad was diagnosed with stomach cancer at the start of the year. And he is a 71-year-old male who has been a carnivore since birth, I suspect, and has kind of disagrees, doesn't really like vegetables, actually, if I'm going to be blunt about it, like really doesn't see the point of them. And the diagnosis, we think, comes off the back of, I mean, he's smoked all of his life, but also eaten processed, really, really bad processed foods all of his life. And I went home, he's undergoing chemo at the moment, and we have no idea what the outcome will be. But I went home maybe a few weeks ago, and I was given a microwaved meal, and I was like, guys, what's going on here? We know that he has to be eating much more healthily, and this is one of the things that the doctors said, right? And he's now started shifting things because he's been in so much pain, and the doctors have been talking about it through chemo, and this is what he needs to be doing. But it wasn't until this diagnosis, which has absolutely rocked our family, right? It completely changes your life when you get a diagnosis like this in the family. And it wasn't until this hurt, this kind of seeing the people around him, I think, it kind of has destroyed my mum. We're all exhausted. But it wasn't until that moment that he was like, oh, something's got to change. I've got to pivot. And whether that's lifestyle or how I'm eating or whatever it may be. And I don't think he would do it if it wasn't for the support around him, right? Because I've got three brothers. So similar, big family to you, Lauren. And we're taking it in turns to be down there and be like, this is what you need to be doing. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to make sure that you're putting into your body. And I think that support piece is that community, coming back to kind of community, and the idea of having a support network around you is so fundamental, because you can take a horse to water, but without the support around it, it's not going to shift, I don't think. So yeah, it's very relatable.
Going back to that quote then, people change when they hurt enough that they have to. That's what happened to your dad early in the year, right? And then the second thing is learn enough that they want to. And then the third thing is receive enough that they want to. So like, I feel your dad has the first one and the third one, but the second one in terms of learning enough that they want to, has he been teaching himself and learning, or has he relied on you to provide that information to cook differently, for example?
Yeah, so I'd love to hear Lauren's thoughts as well on the learning piece, because from the learning perspective, our side, it's been us doing the learning. And I obviously work in the movement, so I'm super aware of how to live maybe slightly differently, or you could say live a little bit better. But we've taken it on ourselves to do a lot of the learning so that we can impart it on him, mainly because he's not in a fantastic condition and can't do it all on his own. But also I think there's a bit of a blocker for him. He's not, again, he's so set in his ways. He's 71 years old. And when you're so set in your ways, it's very hard to take new information on in the same way as we do slightly younger. But Lauren, I'd love to know how you got your dad kind of, obviously he was seeing the results, but then how did he take that next step?
the truth is it took a lot of work, and I even hear it in you, Poppy, that you and your brother are taking these shifts. And I remember that. I remember when my dad had his first heart attack and he was in the ICU, we would take shifts visiting him because we didn't want him being alone, or he had jaw cancer and again, he was in the hospital and we were taking shifts to be with him. And I think unfortunately, I think the elephant in the room that takes vulnerability and discomfort to talk about is that there's fear of death here. There's like a big, big fear of death. And it's the hardest thing to do looking at your parent who you saw as this like immortal superhuman when we were kids as, wow, you're really facing mortality and I'm really scared of what life will be like without you, you know? And I tried that. My mom had actually coached me through that one time. I remember being almost angry at my dad when I would see him not taking care of himself when I was younger, maybe in college. And I would say, don't you want to walk your three daughters down the aisle? Like, don't you want to play with your future grandchildren? And I would shame him and guilt him a bit. And my mom was like, Lauren, it's not about you. You know, your dad's going through his own stuff. It's not about you. And so through this project, I remember thinking, okay, how can I truly make it about him? Like this is about dad. And so it took a lot of work. I mean, my dad and I were meeting up 3 times a week. We would go grocery shopping together and cook and meal prep on the same day. And then we would meet up about half throughout the week and just film together. And because I was creating content about this challenge. And then on Sundays, we would get together as a family and we would do like a big Sunday dinner together as a family. And we would root him on and cheer him on. And my whole family was really involved in the project as well. But that takes a lot of time, you know, like I'm a full-time content creator. So I had the flexibility. And this was a project that I was essentially creating for work. But it was a lot of time. I mean, it was hours and hours a week of grocery shopping, cooking, and that. So I think that's the learning part too, was that it's not necessarily easy. And I think that's the unfortunate truth about reprogramming these neurological pathways. You know, like you said, your dad has this blocker, this resistance, and rightfully so. You know, like these are decades of a learned belief that we have to essentially dismantle. And but again, I remember thinking, but the outcome of this is like I get my dad back, or I get to see you. And this is part of the end of the film was it was an honor and a privilege to see you step into the powerful person that you are, or to see you believe in yourself. And that was like the greatest gift I think any kid can have, watching their parent, you know?
I want to talk about the food and healthcare system. Your film highlighted some pretty big contradictions in those systems. What surprised you the most about how these systems work against each other in many ways?
But I remember my dad's when I was first learning about plant-based diets and the impact on our health. I was 18. Yeah, I was a freshman in college. And at the time, or my senior year, my dad had that jaw cancer. And I remember learning about how the studies that if you fed a cancerous tumor milk or animal products, the tumor grew. And if you removed it, the tumor shrunk. And I'm sitting with my dad looking at his discharge paperwork after he had cancer. And it was a prescribed, and because it was in his mouth, he had to eat soft foods because he couldn't chew. And I was looking at the discharge paperwork and it was like foods you can eat. And it said milkshakes and yogurt and beef stew and chicken noodle soup and these things. And I was like, this is so wild, because I'm learning that these are the very foods that will make a cancerous tumor grow. And here is someone who just had a cancerous tumor removed. So that was my firsthand experience of witnessing this, you know? And again, I had already shared too, if you just walk in a grocery store, granted, I'm in Los Angeles, so like, and I'm in California. Like a lot of the fresh produce that's grown to feed the rest of the country is grown here, and it's a much more common conversation to talk about things like a plant-based diet in a place like LA. But if you even go like a couple counties over, or definitely the next state over, it's very hard to find vegan options. And anyways, when you look at what is being fed or marketed or readily available, especially in low income areas, when you even look at there is not access to fresh produce in these places, so everything is coming processed and therefore packaged. If you're looking at what is on the shelves and what is readily available and what causes things like heart disease or high cholesterol or things my dad was experiencing, they are the same. And the most evil part about this, and perhaps this is what we're talking about too, Poppy, is it's not like it's overnight. Like this is a lifetime of eating these foods. And so when we're younger, we might think we're invincible and we can eat whatever we want. Like I'm young and I'm strong and I can eat whatever I want, but this diet catches up to us. And that's why you see our parents' generation getting these diagnoses. And so there was so much frustration there, especially when I witnessed it firsthand with my dad. I'm like, you're telling me you've been on these meds for 15 years for high blood pressure, and in 30 days, we were able to naturally lower it just by changing your diet? Like, where was that same encouragement or recommendation or support in your doctor's office if this is true?
There's a difference between the healthcare system taking a moderation position, slowly reduce your processed meat and be careful about, dairy and these other products. But when they're explicitly saying milkshake, dairy-based milkshake is good, it's just so confusing, isn't it? I mean, Lauren, how do you navigate that situation?
I remember thinking about my dad and being like, it's not totally your fault. Like, you're doing what you were told. You ate what you were told was healthy for you. You ate what you could afford, and or what was marketed to you, and then you trusted your doctors and you did what they said. Like, it's not completely your fault. I have to think of dad or other people who have his lived experience because it's not mine. So it's almost like it's actually kind of the inverse, huh? When we talk about when you hurt enough that you have to and you learn enough that you want to, it's almost kind of like if you learn enough, you don't get to the hurt in the first place, and that protects you from a lot of the hurt. And so I feel very fortunate and obviously very privileged to have this knowledge now that will probably protect me in my later years in life. Like there's no cholesterol in plant-based products, so I never have to fear having high cholesterol. Do you know what I mean? So I have a lot of anger. I'm not going to lie. I have a lot of anger, and I feel like in a lot of my climate activism work too, the big polluters or like the big players here that are causing so much harm and destruction, it becomes more and more evident, and it's really easy the same way, like you're talking about, Poppy, imperfect activists. It's really easy for us to look at each other and shame one another for like, you use plastic and you drive a car and you eat a burger, whatever. It's really easy for us to look right and left, but there are like big corporations here who are causing all of this damage. And so I try to focus my energy on essentially like holding them accountable, because unless otherwise, it would be so hard for all of us to like do our best in these broken systems than just like try to change the system.
What's your favorite moment in the documentary?
On the last day, so my dad had already gone to the doctor at this point, and they had reduced his blood pressure medication in half because he knew he was lowering his blood pressure. But I wasn't there in his doctor's appointment. And so on the first day, we took his blood pressure, and I believe it was 139/82. You want it to be 120 over 80. And y'all, that is on blood pressure medication, which is crazy. That means some days, and if you look at his chart, some days his numbers were in like the 170s, 180s, which is crazy. And so on that last day, I got to take his blood pressure, and it was 111/72.
A month ago, you were 139/83. Ready for today?
Ready for today. And what are we looking for?
120/80.
One is perfect. Is
120/80, yeah. Dad, 111/72.
And 65 heart rate. That's pretty good too, huh?
Dad, that's really good.
This shit works.
Which is nuts. And it like builds too up in this film of this is all of your hard work, and you're seeing it for yourself. And dad being dad, and I don't know if I can cuss here, but he's like, see, this shit works. And it's that simple. He's like, see? And that is I think even beyond the film, I think that's probably that was the coolest part of this entire experience, was literally seeing the numbers for ourselves and seeing how drastically and quickly this works.
Your work in climate activism as an environmental advocate, do you think this documentary and this process of learning about the powerful effects and the healthful effects of plant-based nutrition has made you become aware, interested about animal agriculture's deleterious effects on the environment? Because often people from your community, they'll say make the polluters pay, and then you ask what the polluters are. It's the oil and the gas and the coal, and there's this kind of cow in the room, so to speak.
Well, I feel like a lot of environmentalists too will eat plant-based or even like reduce their meat consumption because they understand the impacts of animal agriculture. And so even why we participated in Veganuary, what I love that they say, or Veganuary was the challenge we participated in, was they say you come for one, but you stay for the others. So like you might come for climate reasons, but then you stay for the health and the animal rights reasons. Or you might come for your health reasons and then you learn about the mistreatment and torture of animals. Like Dad even says in the film, he says, when you see that pus that comes out of a pig, you'll never eat another pig again. And so he was coming for health reasons, but then he stayed because he was learning more about the mistreatment of animals. They're all the same big, I want to call them like the big bad players here. When you talk about oil and gas and the destruction they're doing, when you think of oil and gas and the destruction they're doing to the natural world to rip up fossil fuels and then pollute the air, it's the same thing when we talk about deforestation to create space for animal grazing. It's the same evil extractive capitalistic players here.
Why do you think people don't make the connection then in the environmental space? Why is everybody, like, I've been to COP27 and COP28, and everybody's so keen to push, this idea that fossil fuels is destroying a planet, which absolutely is. And 99% of the stalls and the conferences and the talks about fossil fuels, and only 1% about food system change, when we know that food is at least 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And specifically animal agriculture, livestock farming and fishing is so bad for the environment. So why do you think, is it that people don't want to acknowledge something that they are responsible for? It's easy to point the finger at other industries and wait for governments to change and wait for the next time we need to buy a car, and then eventually we'll go to electric. Whereas food, we know we can do it in 2 hours because we've got dinner, and then the next morning, then lunch and dinner every single day, 3 times a day. Is that kind of why subconsciously people don't think about it?
My experience in talking to anybody, regardless of climate passions, is that food is so personal. Food is so personal, and people feel attacked when we talk about what they should and shouldn't eat, or not should and shouldn't, like the impacts of the things on their plate. And I have this, perhaps it's a bit of a hot take, but I have this thought that if you knew, you wouldn't. There's no way. If you knew, you wouldn't. And the same goes for garment workers. If you knew the conditions that garment workers were sewing your fast fashion clothes in, there's no way that you would say, yes, I continue to choose this. And that's why, as heavy as they are, and they should make us uncomfortable, when the undercover footage comes from like a feedlot of how cows or pigs or chickens are treated, if you knew, you wouldn't. There's no way. And I think it requires people to confront their comforts. And because these are very like we think we are, or think we're the uncomfortable ones in having to like audit the things that we eat. And it's like, okay, well, imagine the animals that are being mistreated or the people who are working on these farms, like anyway, I know that this requires us to confront our comforts. And the conversation around the like just and urgent transition to renewable energy has had so much like positivity on the other side too. We talk about like, look at what clean energy can look like, and look at these incentives, and look at these tax breaks, and look at what clean air. This is something that we all benefit from. I don't think the same has been done because of the like massive giant that animal ag is, as well as big pharma. Like we know that these are the same. There hasn't been the same of like, look what this can look like if we reforested the land that has been torn down for cattle grazing. Or like, look at what our communities could look like. Look at what the grocery store could look like if we removed all of this like carcasses out of here. I don't know. I don't think it's been the same.
What's super interesting about that, sorry, just to jump in and offer a slightly different perspective. When we look at our community, we actually find, maybe unsurprisingly, but food is emerging as the most powerful gateway into the climate movement, particularly for our audience. And thinking about it from your perspective, Lauren, as a kind of environmental content creator, and thinking about that side. But the other side is the layman, the imperfect activist, right? And how do we how do we get them into the climate movement? We've really struggled because climate as a concept, environmentalism as a concept, it is so big and broad and vague, and people don't know how to engage with it, right? But food is so personal, as you say, just to echo that. It's universal. Our choices reflect our values, our identities, our daily habits, and it makes it a really relatable starting point for talking about climate change, which can, as I've just said, feel quite overwhelming and kind of abstract. The other thing is the difference between the environmental movement as a whole and the climate movement. With food, it's you can see the tangible impact. Unlike kind of systemic energy or transportation reforms, food choices are like actions that individuals can take immediately, and I think that sense of agency is really helping people feel like they can contribute immediately, which is something we're seeing with engagement on platform in terms of looking at recipes, looking at food related content, and it's such an interesting way because it's such a tangible way of communicating with people through food.
This is so cool. So great to connect. And yeah, thank you so much. And check out the film.
Thank you so much. This is awesome.